How's everybody doing here at Dcentral Con? Everybody's having a good time? Yeah. Woo! You got your super loud so the mic picks it up. No? No? Oh, come on. There you go. There you go. Awesome. So we're going to be talking about layer one blockchains. I always love this type of conversation because we're talking about foundations of how this new technology, which isn't so new anymore, is going to continue to work and evolve. So I'm just going to give everybody the opportunity to introduce themselves real quick, and then we'll go right to it. Why don't we just start over at the end, and then we'll make our way this way.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Francesco, CEO of Cadena Eco. Cadena is a scalable proof of work layer one. And apart from that, we also designed our smart contract language called Pact.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Barkin. I'm the president of Lamina One. We're a layer one blockchain founded by Neil Stevenson, godfather of the metaverse, and Peter Vicenis. And we're building a blockchain that's optimized for metaverse creators.
Nice. I know Peter. He's from Seattle. I'm from Seattle. All right, go ahead. Oh, you have to share it, Mike.
I'm Zach Gall. I'm the head of communications and community for the EOS Network Foundation. We are the stewards of the EOS Network. We are the only foundation born out of its own community, empowered by its token holders. Over the last year, we forked out the original founders.
I'll lift up. Microphone up a little.
And happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's just do some level setting real quick. Can one of you feel free to let us know what is a layer one blockchain? Like, what does that even mean?
Who's the most technical here, or do we want to do non-technical?
Sure. So layer one blockchain is the lowest level that you can get in blockchain infrastructure. It's a platform where people can deploy smart contracts, and that gets executed sort of at the lowest level down. I'm saying this now, but hopefully in a couple of years, you won't even have to know this information. It's similar to, when you send someone an email, you don't know what happens in between, you just know that the other person gets it.
Yeah, so, the layer one is basically responsible for all the transactions and security and node operations. And then at the L2 layer, if you don't mind, we can talk about the L2s too. basically created on top of those,
L1 to L2
to help with scaling and efficiency, and like if there's a certain niche that you're interested or a certain community that you're interested in catering to, that's really where you can solve at the feature level.
And is there a layer 3? Is that just the app layer?
Is that subnets or apps maybe?
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, maybe
Some people
app.
would call them subnets.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I could pick up on the layer 3.
Yeah, go for it.
They pretty much nailed the layer 1. We think of layer 2s as this scalability solution on top of a layer 1. Layer 2 could technically be an application as well. And then I would say that a layer 3 is almost like another layer above that. So applications built on top of an application built on top of a blockchain. So I think you could have an infinite number of layers up, and you could even have infinite amount of layers horizontally too. So like I know we speak in terms of layer 1s, 2s, 3s, 0s, but it's really all just going to kind of be a big mesh if everything kind of works out.
Yeah, exactly. Back to what Francesco was saying, right? Is ideally we don't know, from a consumer perspective, you don't need to know this, and arguably even from a business perspective, right? Those of us that use AWS or Google Cloud or whatever, unless you're actually building on it, you might know exactly how it works, but everybody else is just inputting data onto it, et cetera.
We get this question a lot from investors, particularly right now. Like, what's the reason to do another layer 1 versus an L2? And I think there's the question of why not? Like, yes, we're 10 years in, but I think arguably, you can't say at the risk of pissing off some maxis, you can't say the first innovation is just it, right? There's a lot that we can do in the space, and there are certain people, we cater to the metaverse side of things, where latency is a major issue. So if you want to be able to build a layer 1 that is scalable in a way that understands and is able to serve a certain community that needs certain features, you should have the flexibility to do that. And it may resonate culturally in a way that other layer 1s don't.
Yeah, definitely. So I feel like when, at least a couple years ago, when like this layer 1, layer 2 conversation used to come up a lot, it would be basically because this notion or this thought that perhaps layer 1s can't scale. So I'd love to just pose that to you all. Can layer 1s scale? And how might each one of you, with your perspective, protocols, companies, be thinking about that?
I mean, I'll say a few words about it and pass the mic. It's my friend here. But I mean, I think it depends on what the audience needs. I mean, obviously you start to build, the L1s will become stretched for resources. Like, I think it's hard to argue that one L1 is going to be able to serve like a global network and all of the things that will be built upon it. And the more that you get into things like sharding and sort of L2s being built on top of it, like there's a cost for that in terms of like latency and performance that we all have, and costs that we all have to deal with and absorb. So I think my immediate answer would be that like there are definitely still scaling issues on the L1 side, but the way to deal with it at the moment is like there will probably be a lot of L1s, and then on the L2 layer we'll start to be able to build feature sets that further categorize and cater to certain groups and niches. But that's a hard question to answer. I don't think it's kind of like, could one cloud provider serve the whole world in terms of their cloud computing needs? So I think probably not.
I think that's a great way to put it, right? Like as an analogy there, exactly like that. You wouldn't be able to do that. And when you think about, just different business use cases, like you're saying, that makes a big difference there. Did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, no layer 1 as it stands today has mass adoption scale. So Dragonfly Capital last February did a really interesting benchmarking. They, instead of looking at transactions per second is typically the metric that every blockchain uses to say this is how fast I am. But every blockchain kind of counts their TPS a little bit different. So for example, like Solana counts peer-to-peer networking between the nodes. Typically on most other blockchains, that's not even considered a transaction. When calculating transactions per second, it's calculating the most basic transfer you could possibly make on a blockchain, which is sending your protocol token from account A to account B and just going back and forth as fast as you possibly can. So when you hear tens of thousands of TPS or millions of TPS, it's all bullshit. Because when you're using an application, it's much more complicated than a simple token transfer. So the Dragonfly Capital research, what it did was it compared all of the different EVM chains to Solana native, and they calculated it based on swaps per second. I believe swaps per second is a much more realistic metric of how fast these blockchains actually go, and it was quite disappointing. Matic was like 70 swaps per second. Polygon. The fastest one was 194 swaps per second. That was Binance Smart Chain, and then Solana native, it was about 240 swaps per second. So with our EVM product we're building, that's kind of our guiding star, and we have benchmarks of that of very fast swaps per second. But I see that as a real metric, and it really, so we could brag when our benchmark comes out, it's the fastest, but it's still super slow. Like even at hundreds of swaps per second, that's not global scale. No layer 1 can scale in its current form for mass adoption, and we just need to be kind of realistic about that. You could scale with layer 2s, you could scale horizontally, but every different scaling solution, you actually lose certain components of interoperability. And essentially, you're still going to have this capital formation on the chains with like the DeFi, for example. It's just going to kind of be like the metropolitan cities compared to like the small cities. And there will be interconnecting bridges and roads between all of them. But I don't think any one specific chain itself can scale, and that's why we're seeing things like DApp-specific chains on Cosmos and subnets on Avalanche. I think that horizontal scaling is really going to be what sets apart the layer 1 blockchains. And if they could interoperate between themselves, like IBC with like EOS IBC, with Cosmos IBC, that's where we'll kind of have the chain of chains model. And that's kind of the future I see, is very multi-chain interoperable future, but the bridges are still kind of being built, and they're still very insecure by what we've seen with the over $4 billion of exploits and hacks over the last year.
Yeah, I actually think that layer 1s will scale, and they do scale today. We launched Cadena on mainnet in early 2020. We started with 10 chains running in parallel. You can think of each chain as having more or less the same throughput as an Ethereum today. And so with 10 chains running in parallel, that's pretty much the throughput of 10 Ethereums. We scaled that up to 20 chains in production several months later, and we have now the code in place to scale it to any number of chains. So you can think now that, we're not going to go up to that number now, but as the demand surges and we need to, we may be running hundreds of thousands of blockchains in parallel at the same time. So then you could think, if each chain is an Ethereum, you have the throughput of 100,000 or more Ethereums happening at the same time. And that's all on the layer 1 base level.
Yeah, so you brought up Ethereum, so I'd love to just get right into this then. One of the quote-unquote drawbacks of Ethereum, historically, I guess, has been its scalability issues, right? Which, why you have quote-unquote layer 2s that have on EVM. But this summer, the Ethereum merge finally happened. And I'm just curious, in your perspective, it's like, is that deemed a success? Is there a need for layer 2 from an Ethereum context? Does that solve everything, or is it not quite what it was built out to be?
Yeah, sure. So I think, first of all, like as a technological feat, being able to change the consensus mechanism of a blockchain in production at scale, hats off to that. But the one thing I have to say is that the narrative of what we'd been promised with the merge to Ethereum 2.0 has significantly changed since it started. Ethereum 2.0 after the merge was supposed to actually bring scalability to Ethereum. What it actually ended up being was just a simple move to proof of stake, where now if you read through all the narrative, the main advantage so far seems to be on the sustainability front and not on any actual technological advancements. The Ethereum 2.0 as it is today still needs layer 2s to scale, still needs way more technology advancements such as sharding to scale. And even the way that Ethereum 2.0 is supposed to shard, it's still going to be very limited by the beacon chain, because if chains need to talk to each other, the throughput is going to be kind of funneled through this beacon chain that runs through the middle.
Well, theoretically too, wasn't it supposed to bring greater decentralization by giving kind of allowing more people to get in the game, right? To be able to stake a little differently. I'm curious if it delivered on that. I'm not sure on that front either. If more people actually did get into the game and it further decentralized it or not.
I would say I think it's technically more centralized now, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the arguments that you could never get to the end of, right? What is centralized or decentralized proof of stake versus proof of work?
Well, I think, but the theory was that if you could allow people to just stake 32 ETH and be able to on a $1,000 laptop participate in node operations, then you actually were allowing for greater decentralization than if you needed people to have serious mining rigs and kind of those unsustainable. I can tell you this.
That's assuming most people running their own hardware, which has proven to not be the case. I mean, it kind of carries over from from mining pools on proof of work Ethereum, and it was mostly just the mining pools with the small miners kind of chipping in, but the small miners were at least running hardware themselves. With Lido and liquid staking on Ethereum kind of taking off, 30% of the stake-weighted governance and consensus over the Ethereum network is held by Lido staking node. Lido is running all of the infrastructure. The token holders have some kind of say in that infrastructure, but Lido has a $150 million market cap compared to Ethereum with a $100 billion market cap, and that's 30% of the consensus of the network. You throw in Coinbase, you're close to 51%. You throw in another exchange, you're over 51%. Not saying that everyone's a bad actor in Lido and Coinbase and everyone's going to go rogue, but it's a real risk that didn't exist with proof of work. So I think from the sustainability front, for sure it's doing much better. But I think a lot of the expectations that people had who weren't actually reading between the lines, people expected scaling solutions. That didn't come. So there's been sharding discussed. There's layer 2s like Optimism and ZK rollups. But even with the rollups, there's no interoperability between the rollups. So they might be cheaper when you go to your first rollup with an optimistic rollup. What happens when that optimistic rollup hits its capacity and it needs to scale? What happens then? You run into the same issues just on a different layer. So I think there's been good and bad. But I don't understand how the next time there's a lot of transaction activity, like in the next bull cycle we're going to see, when the transactions go up this time and you're paying $200 to stake and unstake from Uniswap, before you're like, well, the electricity costs are really high. We got to pay the miners for the security of the network. Well, now there's not all that mining and electricity costs. So now how do you validate these $200 transactions to do very simple DeFi? It's just not going to scale for mass adoption. It might be good for token economics and the deflationary narrative, but usability, huge step back.
Didn't fees come down though a little bit, or no? Or is that just a temporary thing?
Usage way down, so it's really hard to say. But it's still like 15 to 20 TPS. It doesn't go faster. There's minimal scalability improvements with the current version of ETH2.
So going a little off script here, do you think they should have stuck with proof of work?
Yes.
I mean, it was their differentiating factor. So I know you guys have a proof of work component. So you're one of the last Mohicans. That was, I believe, one of Ethereum's strong suits was it's proof of work. It's Turing complete with smart contracts, and Bitcoin can't do any of that. Bitcoin's like very limited in what it does. It does what it does really well, but Ethereum was kind of like that was its thing. I feel like that was a unique differentiator for Maximus of Ethereum, was the proof of work security. It lost that. I would pass it to someone else. I think it was a mistake.
I want to hear what Francesco has to say.
Yeah, sure. And also this touches back to what we were saying before. Giving a lot of stake to your network to a company like Coinbase that is a publicly traded company in the US kind of passes the power of censoring the network to the US government. There's no way if some subpoena or something comes into Coinbase that they're not going to comply and start censoring transactions on this network. And at which point wasn't, the whole premise of a blockchain having an open and permissionless network? And at least at the base layer, that's very, very, very important.
I mean, that's where the staking pools kind of come in with CoinDesk, Kraken, and Lido. You censor the transactions. Ethereum only has 10-second block speed. So if let's say 60% of the network is censoring transactions, let's say transactions that interacted with Tornado Cash. So now every 10 seconds you're going to have a transaction fail, and there's like a 60% chance of it hitting a node from one of those staking pools. And that's assuming that 40% of the nodes are actually not censoring transactions. So there's a high likelihood of censorship because of the ownership of where these publicly traded companies live. And because of the block speed, it's just going to be really, really slow to push through those transactions if they go through it all.
So what you're saying is, in this case, censorship resistance might be more of a marketing term.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. It could eventually go through as long as there's some amount of nodes that aren't censoring transactions, and you try enough times until it hits one of those nodes. Then you could still be censorship resistance, but with caveats.
Yeah. So we touched a little bit on this. Can we talk a little bit about how interoperability currently works, and if we have interoperability right now, and then from there is what do we need to actually have interoperability at scale?
I mean, I'm not an engineer, but I mean, I can tell our take is that we believe very much in multi-chain and like to be the most sort of densely connected network. And so we want to build a ton of different ways in and out. And I think the bridges exist today. I mean, you might compromise on performance. I don't think interoperability is solved yet, even close, would be my short answer.
I come from an engineering background, and the unlikely take on this is it may actually be something that is never solved. At the computer science level, to do any sort of cross-chain communication, you need a trusted third party to kind of authorize what's happening on one side and on the other. There still hasn't been any sort of known technical solution to this problem that's been around for decades, of communicating between two networks without this trusted third party. And that's what's happening today with this tech, right? Yeah. Basically, at worst, you're trusting some sort of centralized entity, whether it's an exchange or a fully centralized bridge. And at best, you're trusting another blockchain with worse security than the two blockchains that are communicating to each other. Yeah. And also from a regulatory perspective, what's happening right now is certainly very much in the gray area, because if you think about it, what's actually happening is on the origin chain, you're taking this asset and you're locking it up in some wallet that is owned by some entity or by this other third trusted network. And then what happens is you mint a derivative of this asset on the chain that you're transferring it to. So at that point, you probably have to worry about all sorts of securities laws because you're minting a derivative of something and you're a custodian of this asset on the other side.
Do you think you can leverage like L0s, the emergence of L0s, these sort of like clusters of interoperability, like around certain niches, or?
Before you answer that, tell the audience what an L0 is as well.
I mean, do you want to explain it from a technical standpoint, or?
I don't think it exists, so give it a shot.
All right. I mean, so L0s are, I mean, I guess it's questionable whether they exist or they're just another sort of fragmentation of the lexicon for like marketing purposes, but it's supposed to be more about sort of these clusters of interoperability, and their job is to drive interoperability and cross-chain compatibility. Like Cosmos, right? Would categorize them that way.
Ish?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're on the decentralized stage. Decentralization does exist in certain contexts. I think it's probably the most overused word in blockchain. So I'm curious, do layer 1s need to be decentralized? And also, are layer 1s decentralized?
That's like religious.
I want to get contentious here.
It's a religious battle. I think, we're at a really interesting point. I mean, we talk about this a lot because we sort of sit at the intersection of metaverse, which is much more the background that I come from, and sort of the crypto blockchain world, which comes from a different space and perspective, and sort of rallying around this idea that, you need to have zero capability to be influenced by political parties or larger political systems, like that I should have my sovereign, like my identity should be my identity and not owned by the government. And there's a lot of sort of, dare I say, libertarian type principles, like, that are at the foundation of that. On the metaverse side of things, when we talk to creators, like, that's not necessarily what they are driving towards. They want to create really incredibly high quality experiences with low latency, and they want to tell stories, and they want to create compelling game mechanics and loops and bring people back, and they value performance above all. And so you have a little bit of a battle between those two sides about how do I deliver really high quality performance and high fidelity without compromising on the truly massively decentralized side. I was just talking to Joe Lubin the other day, one of the great sort of global thinkers around this, and he said, because I was going on and on about UX UI, which is like absent from the industry at the moment, and he was like, well, my question is, how do you build really high quality UX and a massively decentralized system and maintain both of those positions religiously? And I don't know that you can. So I think in certain niches and for certain categories, you'll see a little less decentralization and maybe some off-chain stuff, some centralization around aspects around gameplay or things that require, zero latency, right? Like if I'm in a game situation and you're using timestamp and like we need to determine exactly who shot the thing first, like that is paramount in that experience above all else. So, but if you're talking about PFPs, maybe not so much. So I think it depends. It's a religious battle. We're trying to navigate it ourselves.
So first of all, I think decentralized and not decentralized is black and white. It's definitely a scale of decentralization. You could add more redundancy to a network. For every node you have replicating the blockchain, that's adding extra costs for the blockchain to just operate in general. So there needs to be kind of a balance and a threshold to balance scalability with decentralization. As far as governance, I kind of speak from a personal thing that occurred. So EOS, the blockchain, launched in 2018. It launched after a $4 billion token sale by a company by the name of Block One. This company was, after raising $4 billion, they made lots of promises, lots of things said of investing into the ecosystem, empowering developers on the network. Well, after a few years of that, the network actually stood up for itself. So even though we are a 4.5-year-old blockchain, last August, we essentially reached a consensus, myself and my co-founder of the foundation, from within the community itself, reached a validator consensus to stand up our foundation out of the community. We're just token holders and community leaders. He ran a validator previously. We were born out of the community. As soon as we launched the foundation and got our independence, we forked out the leaders, the original founders of the project. We forked out $250 million of their unvested token stake. We forked the GitHub. We didn't even own the IP to our own name. We had to buy we had to create new domains. We had to create new logos. And it's a story that we're only now starting to tell, because within our community, we had been gaslit for years. So we spent the first 8 months just heads down building and delivering on everything that should have been delivered in the years prior. And we're just now starting to show up at events like this, just starting to tell our story, because it's no longer like what we're gonna do. We're gonna do this, we're gonna do this. We've got a whole pile of work. It's out of scope for this conversation of Layer 1's.
Well, I'm glad you shared that, actually, because I didn't know any of that. I remember EOS because I do remember the $4 billion token sale that took over a year, and the $26 million fine only for the unregistered, security sale, which was just a minor slap on the wrist. I'm excited to hear your story. I'll probably talk to you after this.
We fired a Peter Thiel-backed multi-billion-dollar company. We fired him. Forked them out.
Yeah, that's crazy. Technology, right? So we just have a few minutes left. Real quick, how will brands or companies that are, call it traditionally Web 2, how do you think they're going to evaluate a blockchain? And give me like your 30-second or less answer. How are they going to make their evaluations?
I mean, like in my background, like I primarily have worked with brands and creators to get them to use emerging tech. Like they care about brand experience, and brand is consistency. And right now, none of this shit is consistent, and that is a problem. Like what you'll see is marketing parts of the organizations that want to be progressive and want to relate to younger people try and experiment, but that's not for the long haul. And I think what we need to do is we need to drive a shift where they start to look at this as the rails that sort of drive the future of their e-commerce presence online. Just like that is that intersection of metaverse and blockchain and how they can use it. But right now, until there is trust and stability, they will not blow brand credibility on any of this. Like the tech alone is not enough.
Yeah, I think that when brands actually build products that go mainstream, that are built on a blockchain, the technology is going to be at a point where they're not even going to have to make this decision up front. There's not going to be anything like, oh, this is built on a certain blockchain or is built on another blockchain. That layer is going to be abstracted so far away, especially at the layer 1 level, that it ends up being a decision of the tech team, not of the business team.
Yeah, like I just had a chat the other day with, this is the last thing I'll say because I think it's a good story on that note, with this guy who's a very internationally renowned musician and artist. And early in my career when I was in the music business, he fought really hard to retain the rights to his music, like seeing where technology was going. Fast forward to now where you see what happened with the Taylor Swift concert ticket sales. There is a fundamentally broken relationship for music. Blockchain can actually solve a problem for people in music. And that is the kind of stuff that will break through.
Yeah, love it. So unfortunately, we don't get to hear your perspective, but I'm sure it's probably similar, maybe, unless it's sorry. But I do want to just give everybody a quick opportunity to let those in the audience and those listening, how can they either get in touch with you or follow you? Or so go ahead, Francesco, and bring it down.
Please follow us on Twitter, Kadena_IO. We got a great team that will get back to you on anything you need. We have a $100 million grants program out right now, so if you're looking to build something new, just reach out.
Awesome.
Yeah, you can join our Discord community. Our social person here is please tell them, join our Discord community. And we also have a rolling fund that we're opening up next week to allow people to get cash for their projects as well as token grants. So we'll start BetaNet in March, and we hope you're all there.
You can follow us on Twitter at EOSN Foundation or at eosnetwork.com. Over the last year since launching our foundation, we've deployed over $30 million in grant funding and public goods. 2 weeks ago, we just announced a $100 million ecosystem fund. for-profit entities and for equity and token-based incentives. The grant program is separate, more for public goods and open source code. But reach out. The new EOS is open for business.
Awesome. And I am either JG Product or JG Blanco on everything. So if you like to connect with me, feel free to do so that way. Thank you, everybody. Give everybody a round of applause. All right. Y'all have a good one.